I don't know what I'm talking about on.
Well, we'll have to explain it because we're live now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh,
no countdown, no theme song. We're just going in.
Opening.
Boo, live.
No opening even. Ladies and gentlemen,
Okay.
Getting back
of
to
all
how
ages.
Mouse Cooking Comics.
This is the Mattriarchy. It is Wednesday, and I am here to talk about public domain characters with 3 of my internet friends. Who know? I've never met any of these people in the real world. It's sort of sad.
That's just the internet.
Yeah. The longest of my internet acquaintances here is Michael Hutchinson from the YouTube channel You Lousy Kids, who had been my editor at one time wildly popular internet fan magazine Fanzing.
Mm-hmm. And I never met anyone who worked for that magazine. I never met any of them. So,
really?
Yeah, I never met any, except for Phil later. But at the time, I never met any of them.
I thought a couple of the guys made it out to the convention out there in Minnesota.
Maybe later, but I met a couple over time. But at the time I ran the magazine, I didn't know any of those people. It's all on the internet.
All on the internet.
Yeah.
Russ, who he and I collabed on a few projects. We did that after Fanzing too. And I've never met him, but I've sent him money. Paid him for a couple things back through the years. Anyway, that don't matter. That's all ancient history. We didn't come in to talk about that.
Yeah.
Also, we have Cartoonicus here.
Stay tuned.
Who I met through Twitless, who probably won't be here tonight because there was things involved and miles and rubber and roads and who knows. But hopefully, if he feels like he wants to come, he can. And if he doesn't, that's okay because the real life happens. And the most recent person I've made the acquaintance of is Colin, who is the writer and artist for The Emerald Man, available on Global Comics.
Hello. Yeah. Good to join you guys today.
Yeah. Colin didn't know this was going to happen today. I was contacting him about a future Mattriarchy, and he said he was free. And I said, what the heck? Come and show up on the show and not know what's going on or
dip your toes in the water. Yeah.
The art's nice.
That's basically how I started.
This is the worst run show on the internet, but that's okay. Tonight.
That's what makes it so great.
That's what makes it so great. Tonight, actually, on a side note, well, there was one point when I've been doing the show since 2018, I think, maybe 17. And there was one period of time. And I don't usually go back and listen to the show after I'm done with it. I just kind of move on to the next topic. Every once and again, I do, but there was one time that I see. That's fine. There was one time that I had I found out that my microphone was terrible on my computer. It was garbled and staticky and hitting the limits real bad, and it had been doing that for some months. There was some sort of setting or some sort of thing that went bad on my computer, and I didn't know it. And nobody told me how bad my microphone was for like months. and so I was just like, what do you mean my microphone's bad? How bad is it? And my guests were like, oh, it's real bad. It's just like, why didn't you tell me? So I bought this puppy, and it's been fine since then.
And it was only yesterday I learned that this needed to be down because I thought that my microphone was coming through the camera here. So I sound better this week. This is why. It's all learning for everybody.
There are no professionals.
Yeah.
So now I ran across this comic. I am trying to remember today. Actually, let me go ahead and share the screen. We'll get this on the thing here. That's how together I am. I haven't even shared the comic out for folks here. Where?
And again, the topic is public domain characters falling into the public domain
and using them the right way.
Yeah.
Specifically because I think that Oz Wonderland War did a tremendous, remarkable, amazing job of dealing with public domain characters in the right way. They're not the only people who have done it, and we're not going to go page by page and read this thing or anything. We're just going to talk about it, hit the highlights.
Does historical characters count as public domain?
Some of them.
I use those quite a bit.
Yeah, I definitely. If you're looking at like characters from mythology, or that would be a public domain. If you're talking about characters like Richard the Lionheart, that would be he would be in. I mean, in all technically speaking, all real living people who are dead now are considered in the public domain. So,
right.
You can't sue somebody for talking about your dead grandpa.
Unless is Cary Grant in the public domain? Could I make a comic book with Cary Grant? And
yeah,
I wish.
I mean, as Cary Grant, sure. No one can stop you.
Interesting. Yes, the book that we're talking about here is Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew in the Oz Wonderland War, which came out a year after. Well, let's see. The Captain Carrot and his Zoo Crew ran issues 1 through 20 from 1982 through 1984, and then they announced this was going to be next, and it didn't come out till 86. And instead of being a 6-part miniseries, it's 3 big fat comics, which I have here. So they're 48 pages a piece. Each story is so. That's why Colin can't speed read through it like he's trying to.
Really am trying to right now, yes.
And so my first exposure to this, like I was aware that this comic existed, but I didn't, but not, I mean, for years and before I read it, but not until probably the late 90s, right? When I first got on the internet. And I started getting involved, hanging out in comic book chat rooms and message boards all back in the day, and finding out about this comic because a bunch of old comic dudes would talk about it, and had a fondness for the silly Captain Carrot adventures, and it got brought up on comic history pages and talking about the history of the pre-crisis multiple Earths and all that kind of stuff, and which was just kind of wacky to me because like I'd started reading comics post-crisis, so the idea about all of the multiple Earths and the adult Robin and the other Earth 2 characters and all that kind of stuff was just kind of wild that they had that much history before the crisis. I had no idea. I mean, it seemed obvious in retrospect because, there were 50 years of comics being published, but I had no idea that people had carried on that much on it. And it was so crazy to find out. And so this was all part of that big mess of stuff. And I was just like, man, that seems like a weird thing. Like, I don't know why you'd bother telling a story about the Wizard of Oz in DC Comics and why that would be a thing. And I just sort of put it out of my mind. Just kind of set it out of my mind. And throughout the years, I became a big fan of Roy Thomas's work in Young All-Stars and the All-Star Squadron, which, of course, had all of these ties to the pre-crisis Earth 2 continuity. And so I started digging into it. And man, I just loved Thomas's take and how he was tied. And in Young All-Stars, if you don't know, he tied a bunch of public domain stuff into that new Earth canon, with the creation of Iron Monroe and tying that to Philip Wiley's The Gladiator, and the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea became part of Neptune Perkins' backstory, and I was just like, oh man, this is really cool. I'm digging this. And then shortly after that is when Alan Moore did did the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh.
And how he had done the same thing with these public domain characters, and that kind of drove me into actually taking the time and reading Dracula and reading oh my goodness, the Strange Isle of I can't remember the name of the dude. I remember the book. Anyway, and reading some of these books that he was basing it on, and seeing how they interacted with it, and how true or whatever they were to the books. And I would like to say that I do feel that Alan Moore, while I really enjoyed especially the first volume of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I think he kind of screwed the pooch with his portrayal of Mina Harker, who is not like Stoker's Mina at all.
Mm-hmm.
He just wanted to write about a feminist and just picked somebody to be a feminist, and that's definitely not the Mina Murray, Mina Harker character in the slightest. And that's a bugaboo for me.
Oh, I hate it when they
Dr.
change the
Moreau.
characters in Dracula.
Yeah, Dracula is such an iconic book. But
Well,
anyway,
I didn't have a problem believing that Mina might get divorced by her husband, who's embarrassed by all this and is not fully forgiving of her as having been, basically been dominated by this other guy, that maybe she was cheating on him, and it's embarrassing, and it's societally it's embarrassing. She's been savaged by a foreigner, as she says in the book. And yes, she's a little too advanced in her feminism for the time, but I didn't have a problem ignoring that, just that she might be a very strong-willed, she may have grown from what was she, like 24, 25, that she's like supposed to be a little older here and a little more changed in her thinking based on everything that's happened to her. I didn't have a problem buying it. So yeah.
But my biggest issue with that on it is because it was a betrayal of Harker's character. Because Harker, after having gone through what he did with Dracula and with his wives, he became hardened after and being nursed back to health by Mina. He became hardened, and so when she was attacked, he traveled across Europe to kill the son of a bitch. Right.
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of unfair to him.
You don't travel across Europe to kill a man and then divorce the wife that you did this for. Right. That's
you've no idea what their marriage was like for the next 5 years, though. And you never know.
I would give you that, except that I do know what Stoker's marriage was like, and so I can project pretty well into into how he intended that to go based upon the epilogue. So
back to Oz.
Back to Oz. So anyway, the reason I bring those other books up in relation to this one is that it set me upon this idea of using these public domain characters within other fiction in a way that can be more or less truthful to that source material, and it stirred on my own love of this the broad canvas storytelling that I loved from the post-crisis DC universe, and how while you're telling all of these different stories, they are creating this rich tapestry of characters and history and events that broaden, strengthen, and really beautify the stories as a whole. And so, in doing that, I got curious about this book about 6 months ago, and I saw a review online that just like ball busted this story, and I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, Roy Thomas was involved. I've read the thing. I read Alice in Wonderland many times to my kids when they were small. I'm familiar with the Oz books. I read the thing. I said I saw this review and I said it doesn't even make sense. It could possibly be that bad. Island of Dr. Moreau. Yes.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Sorry.
No, you're right. I'm a moron. Anyway, which is a horrifying book.
Can I talk as the only person who read this when it came out? Can I just
Oh,
give you
yes.
a few little details,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind? This was supposed to be published shortly after the end of the Captain Carrot and his Zoo Crew series ended. They announced it on the last page. They had a drawing of the Zoo Crew characters meeting the characters from both books, like coming over the hillside towards them or something like that.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that was like the last page, as they said, there is more Captain Carrot to come, but then nothing happened. And you'll notice there's no USB code on here. This is a straight to the comics shops release that happened in early 86 or end of 85. It's cover dated January of 86, which means that on the last page, it was supposed to have come out for a while, and they finally took their 6-issue miniseries and released it as 3 books just to comic shops. And at the time,
I thought these were unusually long issues.
Yeah, and I bought them from. I had to find where did I go? Was it Green Bay? Trying to find a comic shop at the time was hard, and so I found them somewhere in central Wisconsin. I found a shop that I went to. It was like mostly a record store, but then it also had comics. And
that's amazing.
And so I was elated, and then I had to go back and get the others. So I had to go back across Wisconsin. It's like, please let that one be in. Please let me get one. And so these are beautifully done, but I felt like I was the only person in the world who read them. And it came out so late. And then inside the in the last issue, and I mean, not to jump way ahead, but at the end, the Inferior 5 shows up and says, "Hey, we're trying to get back to Earth 12." And it's like, this came out after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Earth 12 isn't there anymore. In fact, the last issue of Crisis shows Dumb Bunny and Blimp in the background of one of the panels.
Yep.
It's like they're integrated into the world now. And so it was a little out of place, but it had been done long before Crisis was finished. So
right.
So
let's take a let me finish up one thing, and then I want to go back to talking a little bit about Captain Carrot. So so like I said I got curious about this, and I saw that review, and it was so mean, and I'm like, this can't be possibly right. This has just got to be somebody who doesn't understand that comics are not just like Witchblade or something. And so which is a grave insult for me, by the way. If you don't know me real well, I don't like Witchblade. Anyway, it's not horrible, but it's not good. But anyway, back to the thing. So I sought this out because I had to find out what the business was about, and I was so pleased to find out that not only was this review wrong, but I was right about the review, because it's a funny animal comic. That's the thing, is it's a superhero funny animal book, and so it fits in the criteria of funny animal books, where the point of it is humor, and that humor can be exaggerated and played upon by action and by drama, but all of those are there in service of being silly and fun. And so that's what this book is perfectly. It fits into that. So before we get into that too much, let's talk a little bit about Captain Carrot for those people listening who may have never been, let's not just call it here, who had never heard.
Yeah, I'm with you, audience. I'm with you there.
And his amazing Zoo Crew. So
I am still speed reading. I finished the first issue.
That's amazing. So by the time we finish our introductions, you may really know what we're about. So Hutch, did you read Captain Carrot when it was first on the newsstands back in the early 80s?
I actually have the honor that in 82, the first 2 comics that I actually ever bought were Justice League 200, the 200th anniversary special, and Captain Carrot number 2 or number 3. I can't remember which one I got first, because then I had to find number 2 because it fed into the other one. Then I had to find number 1, of course, because I'd missed it. But I bought those both at the drugstore where my mom worked, at an actual drugstore on the stands. So it was the first So it was one of the first comic books, although I'd been reading comic books for a decade, they were always my friends' comics. I never owned any comic books. These were the first ones I paid money for. And I loved Captain Carrot and bought it every month for the next year and a half or whatever that it lasted. And I loved that book so much. And they take themselves seriously as it despite being called funny animals. It's like they take the superheroic seriously, but then their city is named New Yak, GNUYAK, or something like that. So, that's, we think that's funny. To them, that's just the name of a town. That they are serious superheroes, and you can actually take them, except for the fact that this is a duck that stretches named Rubber Duck, or a poodle that shoots stars and stripes from her hands named Yankee Poodle. That's. But they're just as legit as the X-Men or the Justice League because they're animals. So what? They're in a world of animals. That's not weird. It's kind of the same way that you have to take the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on their own as they are, and I go, what? That's animals standing up and talking. That
is really hard for me to do, to be honest.
Well, and it's the same thing as the Duck books, right? Karl Barks
right.
Duck books, right? Where it's real adventure, it's real action, but there are intertextual and visual jokes that exist for humor's sake for the readers, but not for the characters. For the characters, the stakes are real, and they don't know that how funny they're being, because they're not there to be funny. They're there to be service whatever they are in the story, and that conceit is part of the funny animal genre. And the thing about the Captain Carrot that I've read, and I think this actually does a really good job of it, this does as well, is that, yes, there are lots of puns. Calm down. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And that was one of the complaints in that review, was like, there's puns everywhere. They're terrible. And I'm like, well, yes, of course they're terrible. That's the point.
Yeah. But Grant Morrison gets wrong when he tries to do Captain Carrot. He says, this is a cartoon character, and he has his head severed and bouncing around and puts him back on because he's a cartoon. And it's like, that's not this character. That's not this character from this universe. He is as human as you or me, except he's a rabbit, and if he gets hurt, he's hurt. That's, Grant Morrison doesn't understand this character. But
Grant Morrison doesn't understand many things. We're not here to talk about what Grant Morrison doesn't
I'm just saying he brought back Captain Carrot, unfortunately.
Are we slandering Morrison?
Oh,
right
I just like Morrison passionately.
I don't know how many streams in a row we can go without talking about Morrison.
Yeah. Well,
sorry. As long as he messes things up that we're talking about, we're going to talk about him.
Yeah, man, I wish I could join you in on that, but I don't read DC, so there you go.
That's fair. So
anyway,
he's come up the last couple of shows because we were going through the Dawn of DC Superman book, and Morrison's written much Superman, and he's written much about Superman, and I loathe much of his Superman, and Twitless does not loathe his Superman as much as I do, which is hard, honestly, because I have the hatred of 1,000 burning suns for Morrison's work, on the whole, and I'm exaggerating a little for humor's sake, but just a little. Yeah. So anyway, enough of that. So, one of the things that I want to point out on this page, we've talked a little bit about Captain Carrot. We've talked a little bit about how I found this book and why I'm bringing it into this conversation. One of the things that I respect so much, and it's really visible on this page, was how the artists went out of their way to capture the artistic styles of the original illustrations for Alice in Wonderland and Looking Glass, and for, I think it was Tenniel, if I remember right, was the artist on those pieces originally, and the artists for the first several volumes of the Oz books. And we'll share a couple pages as we go around. and to capture those things. And the remarkable thing about that for me is that it still fits with the funny animal look shockingly well. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. And we'll show some of that as we move along there.
Yeah. What is a little strange to me, just as a Captain Carrot reader, is that on the few occasions that they met humans, which they met Superman and they met Changeling, those two characters came through and they're like, "What? You're a human? You're like an ape who walks upright and you're a little taller than us." And here they meet humans and they don't say anything about it. Here also they meet a real cat, not a talking, standing up, dressed talking cat, but a real cat, and they don't really react the way they don't waste the time that if it was a Zoo Crew book, really, that they'd be going, "This is so weird. You're walking on all fours. Why? You eat mice. Why would you eat a mouse? You're a cat." That's they don't waste that time on that differences between their worlds. The characters show up and say, "We need your help in Wonderland." They're like, "We're off." So that's
cool. And I would assume, presumably, some of that would be because they've already met other humans.
Yeah.
So they may have crossed that exposure line at this point.
It's like, okay, so this is our third human. We're on our third human.
Right.
This is nothing new. Yeah.
And another side of it too is that we are also dealing with the difference in writers, right?
Yeah.
So Roy Thomas wrote the early Zoo Crew stories, and at this point we got E. Nelson Bridwell, who I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about Bridwell. He did so much stuff for the DC universe. But he also got some, maybe not start, but at the same time as he was doing the Inferior Five and he was doing Bob Hope and some of those other things, he was writing for Mad Magazine. And he was specifically put on projects by DC in the late 60s because he had that Mad Magazine energy. Now, the funny thing to me about that is that DC was foundational. They were formative. They were heavily involved in the destruction of EC Comics and Bill Gaines' whole career in mainstream comics, that caused him to take the one property that didn't get totally canned, Mad Magazine, and put it into tabloid format and sell it as a regular magazine. And then DC through Warner Brothers ended up acquiring Mad Magazine several generations later. And so it's like this is weird Ouroboros of corruption and a comedy that work together to bring us these amazing comics.
And then they republished the Mad comic things during the millennium when they republished all those classic comics. They're republishing comics from companies that they defeated legally and acquired, like Fawcett and EC,
Yep.
and Mad Magazine,
and it was man, DC did Gaines dirty. I mean, there were other issues in play, that had on with that. I don't want to get into that all the way, but I did want to touch on it a little bit, just because of Bridwell's connection to these stories. And
Bridwell was a writer on Zoo Crew for at least the second half of the series. So he was writing with Thomas, and even here you'll see that Bridwell has Joey Cavalieri helping him with the script. So one's doing plot, one's doing script. But if you don't mind me pointing out, just for all the people who don't know who these are, if you can zoom in on that last panel, Captain Carrot is the leader. He is Roger Rabbit, although they had to change his name to Rodney Roger Rabbit and have him go by his Roger Rodney Rabbit. He has to go by his middle name because he doesn't want to get sued by Wart Grizzly Productions. So what'd you do?
I tried zooming the page around and I got completely over it.
Anyway, so he's the leader. He eats cosmic carrots. He's the only one who loses his superpowers after a certain amount of time. And then that's the page. So if you just can go down to the other quadrant. The other members of the team are Pig Iron, who's the muscle tank, Fastback, who is a super fast turtle. I told you about Yankee Poodle. Rubber Duck is Bird Rentals. He's the superstar Bird Rentals, who was alive at the time. Obviously a parody of Burt Reynolds. And
There we go.
Yeah, and actually, Yankee Poodle is a parody of Rona Barrett, who nobody knows who that is now, but her name is Rova Barkett. And then Ali Katabra is the magician, and the mouse who can shrink to a little mouse is Little Cheese. So he's actually the same size as everybody else, but he's using his superpowers here to be a little mouse.
Can we take a second to admire the genius of the name Ali Cat Abra?
Yeah. Ali Katabra.
I was reading for the first issue just now, and all the puns they're killing me.
Yeah,
in a good way.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that is the thing I love about these characters is that they're just like, yes, that they're silly, yes, they're over the top, but it's unashamedly like what it is. It's not
it's like sincere.
It's sincere. Yeah. It's sincerely insincere. Right?
Yes.
Like it's not expecting. It's like the problem with that reviewer who had such a problem with the how wordy it was and had a problem with how many puns there were is that he thinks that the writer thinks that you're stupid. But what's actually going on is that the writer is begging you to be in on the joke with him.
Yep.
And he assumes that you're smart enough to figure out that it's a joke.
Yeah.
and is inviting you into the world of the joke. Because you've got you've got a turtle who's a speedster. It's funny.
Yes.
In the same way that the very first appearance of the Flash back in Showcase 4 has the second story is Barry Allen facing against the dastardly criminal mastermind, the Turtle. and this is before the idea that the Turtle was also a speed manipulator was there, because it didn't have to be. It was just the tortoise and the hare as a superhero comic, and it's perfectly fine and fun, right? The writer's not apologizing for the conceit. He's saying just ride along. It's going to be great. It's a trick.
Is it any different from the fact that Fastback, who is Timmy Joe Terrapin, his arch enemy is a cheetah who goes super slow, so slow that he's basically a pantomime, like a robot who doesn't move, on the street.
Oh, that he becomes invisible.
Yeah, basically he's expecting the guy to run fast, and he runs off, and he comes back. He's like, "Oh, where'd he go?" He never ran because he's a cheetah, but he's not fast. So anyway, the conceit, like you say, is that yes, these are funny animals, but this is no different than the Teen Titans. In fact, Teen Titans have a giant T building, they have a giant Z building, and they're even making a joke about it here. The elevator has to go diagonally, and it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. So
I didn't know that.
Frank Lloyd Wright designed the building.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Anyway, yeah. So, but is that a pun? That's his name. He's a rat. He's Frank Lloyd Wright. He designed the building. That's not funny. But that's the thing. You have to be in that mood to enjoy Captain Carrot as. So I'm just setting it up for all the people who might be watching who just don't get what is it about these characters. They're no different than any other superhero characters except that they're animals. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing is the whole thing about that is like that's part of the joy of the book is that, because like, let's face it, here's the thing you got to realize. I love the mythology of the superhero. I believe it is vital and important. It is an expression of the American mind. It's all of those things. It's still a little silly that grown men dress up in tights as bats and birds and punch bad guys in the mouth. That's still a little silly. But we have to forgive the silliness if we want the power of the mythology, right? And this is no different than that. And so it's for me, this whole book, because this buries the needle into all of that idea, because not only are we dealing with the zoo crew, we are dealing with them facing an interdimensional war between the world of Oz trying to invade Wonderland. Because the Gnome King from Oz has found that there are other dimensions, and first Wonderland, then the Omniverse. That's his master plan. And so the most unlikely heroes have to stop him. So that's one aspect of it. And I'm not going to go. We're not going to go through here and go all over the series. But I do want to take a little bit of time for each of us to talk about what we have dug about it specifically in this most recent review, and then how we felt it handled the source material. So you have not said much yet, Taylor, Cartoonicus. So tell me, what did you think about Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew in the Oz Wonderland War?
Well, like I said, I was not prepared for how long the issues would be. Each one of them basically completes what I would call like the equivalent to like a single, episode of a TV show with a beginning, middle, and wraps up, has its final battle, all of that, its side arcs and everything that also get wrapped up. So that was actually in many ways, aside from a little bit of a slog trying to get through, the actual experience of reading the stories was very nice because I didn't have to just keep going through this constant to be continued. I also found myself very appreciative of something most Action Comics don't seem to be able to do nowadays, and that is they really understood their world building here and utilized it. The way they were able to creatively put each character's abilities to use in situations and often spin off multiple times from a given situation to say, okay, they're doing this. Well, then what would happen? And he would try to find creative ways for somebody to use their ability in the next situation that they'd gotten themselves into because they previously did something else. All very nice.
Now, one of the things I was particularly interested in you being on this panel for is because of all the people that are semi-regulars to the show, you are the most dedicated to the funny animal the anthro thing. So, in relation to this, do you feel that particular affection of yours gave any different level of appreciation for this story?
I honestly can't say it did because, for one thing, the characters aren't like all their abilities have nothing to do with the actual animal they are. So they might as well just be human characters in that sense. And two, they're just the overall art style of the book is something I don't care for. It's but mainly they just look a whole lot like classic superheroes. They've got incredible amounts of muscle and fairly realistic human proportions and whatnot. And just aside from that, a lot of that kind of Looney Tunes overly exaggerated features is just not my personal cup of tea as far as art style. So to be honest, that was the last thing I was paying attention to. I was more appreciative of all the puns.
There you go. Now, Hutch, of course, you've read this, as you've mentioned, many, many, many times.
Yeah.
In recent reflection, are there anything specifically that stands out to you as being particularly poignant or appreciable?
Okay. Before we get to that, I just want to mention that the only thing that's ever bugged me about this book is that it has Captain Carrot flying, and he does not fly, he bounces. And I'm surprised that Roy Thomas would let them get it's not a problem because he has big ears and he can glide, but he specifically goes over a desert area where if you ever touch the sand, you die, which means he cannot bounce. So if he ever starts losing altitude, he's in trouble. So they actually just decided he can fly.
You know what's interesting about that is that it feels like a direct parallel to exactly what happened with Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That he was always the guy who could just jump great heights, and then
one day he shows up flying.
Well, the Fleischer Studios did that because they were so tired of animating him having to bounce, jump, and they said, "Can he just fly?" And they said, "Sure." And then they just made him do that in the comics. So once again, it's the other media impacting the comics. So same as Kryptonite, same as Jimmy Olsen. Anyway, yes. So suddenly Captain Carrot flies. But aside from that, it sticks. I mean, it's mostly focused on the characters from the two worlds of Oz and Wonderland, and they're trying to retrieve the most famous members of Oz who have all been reduced to figurines. And there's one in various parts of Oz, and they have to go to all the famous landmarks that you remember. The mountain with the guys who bounce their heads, on big springs, and it's like I forget the names of those guys, but it's like I read all the Oz books, and this is so in line with this is picking up after book number 20 or whatever of the Oz books, that all that history has happened and is in continuity. And it's really amazing. If you read those books, it's like this does not seem at all inappropriate to being there. It isn't like a twist on the Oz books. It is the Oz books. It's just, this is another Oz book that's taking place right after that, with some characters from this and some characters from this comic book. And it works so well. And I think the thing that I most liked is the scene where they all get drugged by catnip. All the cats from Oz and all the cats from Wonderland all end up going, ooh, catnip. And
there are some surprisingly adult jokes in this.
There's a little bit of character development for our characters from the Zoo Crew, where they where Ellie Katabra realizes she's in love with Captain Carrot, even though he's not a cat. Yeah. So anyway, it's like I wasn't expecting these characters to advance, but they do.
Well, and then there was the other one of the other moments, and I'm not sure which book it is in, so I'm not sure I'll be able to find it really quickly. But one of the moments that I thought was really great along those lines was when Little Cheese, shrinks down to mouse size to go rescue the Mouse Queen.
That's the second half of this first one.
Second half of the first one. Okay,
well, the second chapter of the first one. So
we'll
second.
We'll find it pretty quick here then,
sure.
Because I'm scrolling down that way. But that's one of the things where now the Mouse Queen looks like a regular mouse, and Little Cheese looks like a cartoon mouse, and yet still they have this moment between them, and where there's a little bit of sparks flying. If it wasn't for the mission, you might take
the poppy field.
What?
The poppy field, puppies! The poppy field from Oz book,
right.
which is right out of the Oz books. Yeah, the poppy field, and they can't. Captain Carrot flies over it, and it's like, it comes up here, and he falls into the thing, and then Rubber Duck tries stretching over it, and he's like, whoops, and he collapses into it. And it's like, maybe I can run at super speed through it, and then Terrapin collapses in it, and it's like, okay, so what can you do? And the mouse is like, we walk under the poppies, and then you don't smell them because you're below them. So the mice go through there. And then the only way that he can notify everybody of where the figurine is to get large and go, over here, and fall and collapse. It's like, I love that. It's very well done.
That was the perfect example of how I was talking about, how they're utilizing the situation in terms of understanding their abilities, to be able to kind of create with, where it's like, I'll literally get, I think the fact that he was actually succumbing slowly to the poppy seeds while down there, he's not able to just walk under them perfectly, right? So he knows he's still under crunch time. He's got to get this done. Then he finds himself in a situation he doesn't think he's going to be able to make it back in time. So creatively, the way to get out of that is to become big, knowing that when he falls unconscious, he'll actually be falling out of the field and be able to be rescued. That is some really well crafted writing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's how super teams work. He knows that the others will watch out for him. It's below this. Yeah, we saw the part with the catnip from the first chapter.
Scroll past that one here.
And this one has the poppy field. There you go.
There's Captain Carrot falling into the poppy field. There's Fastback trying to catch him, and then he passes out. So here we go. And there is and the Mouse Queen. And this is just like that interaction was just wonderful. I just loved every moment of that.
There she is, Mice America instead of Miss America.
That's what
you don't like the pun?
He's accepting. I mean, he's accepting the position to fit in with the other mice. Just wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And so that was one of the things about like I said, I love how, like you were talking about, how it really fits in the Oz books, and as somebody who's really inspired, and I did a lot. I read, the Wonderland books a lot when my kids were small. Read through them probably 3 or 4 times when they were very small, and reading to him his bedtime stories. And so it was one of those things where like it also fits perfectly in with the Wonderland characters, and all of the characters are treated with respect. The conceits of their individual universes are handled well. It is, and it's of the even in terms of the art style and the way that that's made to play out. Everything is honored in this sort of thing. And that's one like one of the things that you said, Hutch, is that it it's not.
Whose dog is that?
I don't know what I mean.
Is it Collins?
Well, it sounded like an elephant.
Oh.
Someone letting the air out of a balloon.
Don't feel bad. I have a dog too. He's just quiet and outside the room. That's
the ticket's doors.
Yeah,
my dogs are far away from me right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's the idea that it's not a remake of Oz in Wonderland. It's not a takeoff. It's not somebody's different version of it, right? It's not like the American McGee's Alice in Wonderland kind of a thing where no, we're going to take or Blood and Honey, the Winnie the Pooh horror series, where we're going to take this concept as public domain character, we're going to make it something it was never meant to be, right? It's actually using those characters as a way of fleshing out and expanding on the universe as it is. Now, last time we talked about, hit this topic a little bit, I brought up, and I used as a thumbnail, some of Doug TenNapel's Steamboat Willie comics. And those are funny because they are commentary on what Disney has become, right? They are social commentary. They are satire within that framework. And so that is a different kind of a thing than this is. And that's why one of the things that and while I like that for satire, I wouldn't like that if he was doing if he was trying to do serious Mickey stories. He's not, right? He'd be failing at it. And people can say, oh, that his satire is cringy. Well, listen, buddy, all satire is cringy. That's what makes it satire, right?
Fair enough.
All satire is cringy. So he's doing satire intentionally. But this is not satire. This is something that it's not even homage. It is carrying on in the spirit of Oz, in the spirit of Wonderland, and marrying it to the spirit of the Zoo Crew.
And you know why this works? It's because both Oz and Wonderland already, as they're in their original forms, are isekai. They are about a person from our universe being transported into this crazy world. So it's nothing to take a few more characters and just keep on doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's more than just isekai too. I mean, it is, but they're both, you know, they were both made to be reimaginings or modernizations of the fairy tale. They're written to be in the fairy tale genre, right? And this is something, man, I wish Twitless was here for this part of the conversation, because he would.
I can be Twitless for a second if you guys need me to. There you go.
What now?
He'll be Twitless for this part of the conversation. Okay. He said, "Yeah."
So one of the things, and he and I have talked about this. We're not on alignment with it, but I really believe that fairy tales are starter level mythology, right? They serve many of the same functions as fairy tales for a different audience, right? And these fair and Oz and Wonderland being fairy stories line up with superhero comics being a form of fairy story or a form of mythology, right? Superheroes come from the same like literary place as stories of knights and dragons and hero legends and all that kind of stuff, and fairy stories are like cousins of that same kind of storytelling. And so the idea that we're taking a superhero story and we're interposing it into this series of fairy stories, it's a natural fit. And
I highly agree.
and I believe that. I mean, and I think you would. I mean, having read your comic, I mean, I think you and me see pretty close to eye to a superhero story. But this also has the benefit of, because it's a funny animal superhero story, it allows you to play with those fairy story elements within Oz and Wonderland in a way that, like, you could put Green Lantern and Green Arrow into this story, but it's a harder
it's a harder sell. It's a harder sell having them get along with all these talking mice and talking
it helps
cats.
that it helps that both have kind of a wackiness to them anyways, so it's a pretty good fit for the character to be in there. They don't feel out of place.
Yeah, and you could do it like a Super Friends setting, but unless you were telling a story that's only a Super Friends story, I think it'd be a harder sell. Because Super Friends is intentionally silly because it's something that's meant to entertain children, 8 to 9 boys and girls, right?
Yep.
So or 8 to 10 boys and girls, and outside of that framework, Super Friends doesn't have a ton of appeal outside of nostalgia. I would think. I mean, even having watched them recently,
Yeah.
I went back to watch them about a few months ago, and I was just like, I like it, but I think I like it because I used to be 7.
Yeah. The only other thing that I going back to, I'm sorry, because I didn't really finish talking. In the second story, and this is featured on the cover of the second issue, you actually have they bring in all, because we've seen them bring in all the cat characters for when they have that thing with the catnip, and they bring in all the mice characters, and then they bring in all the bunnies, and that includes Hoppy the Marvel Bunny for probably the last real, what you would consider a real appearance of Hoppy.
Yeah,
because after that they've redone the Marvel characters, the Captain Marvel characters, and so this is like the last appearance of Hoppy the Marvel Bunny as anyone recognizes him, and then from then on he's like a twist on, it's like he's a talking cartoon, bunny. It's not possible to align that with the real DCU in the same way that Mr. Mind can never be a little, a little tiny bug with big eyes and a big cartoon mouth. He's always got to be some, twisted real worm thing, So this is like the real bunnies, the real cartoon bunnies, and they have like several others from different DC comics talking funny animal things that I didn't really recognize, but and then they have Wonder Wabbit, who is from the neighboring world next to. I didn't explain this. Roger Rodney Rabbit is the artist on Just a Lot of Animals, the version of Justice League. He's the guy who writes the Justice League on his Earth, and that's why he's so familiar with superheroes when he becomes one. And he finds out that he's tapped into. He took over the series from Gardner Fox, who is an actual fox, and they had both tapped into the adventures of a neighboring Earth, and he's writing them as if he's coming up with them, but they really exist in a neighboring Earth. This is just like the old Earth 1 and Earth 2 stories from way back when in the Silver Age, and the Earth Prime stories in the Silver Age too, where the idea that Earth Prime was our Earth, and the adventures there. I mean, you'd have adventures on Earth Prime where the DC editors, Julie Schwartz and all those guys, would actually be featured in this. And then they had one superhero, which is the Superboy from that world. So which we won't talk about him, but we won't talk about Superboy. But the Just a Lot of Animals actually exist in a neighboring, it's next to Earth C. It's called Earth C minus because it's minus the Zoo Crew. And so that's where Super Squirrel and Wonder Wabbit and what was his name? Bat Mouse and all the others. I can't remember those guys. Yeah, my favorite one is Elongator. But yeah, he's a gator who stretches. And so Wonder Wabbit gets pulled out of her universe into there, and she kind of flirts with this is again more character development because this is one of his old flames. They had met before and kind of had a thing for each other. So
it suddenly becomes the rabbit verse.
Yeah, it becomes the rabbit verse from it. And there's the ones from, of course, there's the White Rabbit and the March Hare, and the other one I can't remember is But yeah, those are the ones from Alice in Wonderland. And then I don't know who the one that looks so much like. Yeah, Easter Bunny. Yeah, okay. Oh, of course, he becomes
Diana Prance. I forgot her name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, she says Kansas, not Cornsus. So yeah, maybe they on her Earth they might actually have real normal names. I don't know. But yeah, they duck behind. They each duck behind the. I mean, Roger Rodney Rabbit and the other guy who is Hoppy the Marvel Bunny both go behind the same rock to change costumes, and and they come out having apparently not seen each other. But yeah, there's Hoppy the Marvel Bunny.
There he is.
Yeah. And so this is like extra poignant on top of the fact that you've also got the other stuff.
I'm learning about a lot of new characters or old characters I've never heard about.
the Just a Lot of Animals thing was a two-parter. I'm sorry to go on about Captain Carrot, but this was the best part. They had a crossover that was modeled on the same George Perez covers that all the other Earth Crisis on, Earth 3, Crisis on, they always have like the things with the character faces around the edges and the bottom and the sides. You remember how they would do that on the Justice League comics back when George Perez was the artist? So they did that, and it's like, oh my gosh, it looks just like the Justice League covers.
Oh my goodness! And here's something I never even picked out about these gnomes.
Yeah,
they're the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, they are.
I didn't pick that up reading it before. You got the elongated gnome. You've got the rock gnome here. You've got the fire gnome. Or sheer torture.
A shot at Marvel.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Bridwell. If you, I just recently finished
an invisible one too
of the Inferior 5 books, and Bridwell was like stuck his finger in Marvel's eye in like every issue. like all the supervillains that the Inferior 5 face up against and accidentally defeat, a ton of their like fellow heroes in Megalopolis are all like pastiches of Marvel characters. And
yeah, so this is well traveled.
This is all well within Bridwell's like on his bailiwick of gags. That's just grand. But I read this, but I did not even stop to realize that was the Fantastic Four of gnomes.
Yeah,
facing up against.
Of course, the Easter Bunny becomes very important because what does he have? He has eggs, and the gnomes hate eggs. The eggs are poison to gnomes, so that's how he defeats them.
And look, the Easter dye is used to make the invisible gnome visible. This is great.
There you go.
This is great. It's just so clever with how they work all this out. So anyway, to kind of wrap things around a little bit. Yep. One of the things we wanted to talk about was, like I said, using public domain characters the right way. And while I definitely think, oh, wait, hang on a second. Wait, I must jump to the end. Colin.
Yes.
You have started reading
yeah, you guys started talking about stuff.
We have been talking about it.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or feelings that you would like to talk about, having just been exposed to this for the very first time live on air?
It's definitely something. Definitely not my cup of tea. But if I was forced to read it, I would read it.
Is that a compliment?
No. Actually, I really like a lot of the art. It's very colorful, and usually I don't really read a lot of like comics that like this that have like funny animals and whatnot. But it's very appealing. I will say that and you definitely feel the. I definitely feel like I'm in Wonderland and Oz with how crazy everybody's acting and everything. Some of it's almost a little overwhelming, but then again, it's an older comic from like the 80s when they'd have really wordy stuff. And I like that, but it's not something you really speed read.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I do want to talk about before we get to the end of the things, is because we had to talk about this a little bit before we went live, was how wordy and how punny it is. And how they just,
I like puns.
And they just don't make comics like that so much anymore, right? Or the idea that you're expected to read about it. And you were mentioning how, like, you like a comic like that, because it gives you the time to sink your teeth into these ideas and really think them through. And I was going to say this off air, but I want to talk about it now because it's one of those things that gets me so annoyed about modern comics, because you spend all this money and then you get to read them for 4 minutes and then what, right?
You wait until next issue, and then you go through the entire arc for like 2 years maybe, and then it's just disappointing at the end. And it's like, why did I spend like hundreds of dollars on all these comics when it's just going to be like back to status quo for the billionth time?
Right. Well, and I don't mind the illusion of change if the trip was worth it. But if
it's usually not.
Almost the time. But the other thing about it is, the other day, I have this really fun shirt that I got for Christmas. And it says, it's got a picture of comic panels, and it's got some pals and bam, some splats on it. And it says, I can't right now. I have reading to do. Right?
Did you notice panel 3 there? It says visitors to Gnome Team 0. All this time I thought it said home team. It says Gnome Team because, as Colin pointed out, they misspell gnome. Well, that is the correct spelling as used in the Oz books. But gnome is spelled Nome. It's a pun, and it's a joke.
It's great.
And all this time I thought that it said home, because an H looks kind of like an N, when you
I don't get it. Why is it spelled wrong?
Because that's the way they were spelled in
Gnome. But
yeah, it should be gnome.
But that's just how Baum did it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
for Baum reasons.
What I love the most about this book, though, is at the end, it is a Wonderland character that brings down the Oz character, not the Captain Carrot characters, but it is a specific, because we already talked about this. The gnomes are what do they consider poison?
Eggs.
As eggs. So he's defeated by Humpty Dumpty, who comes very close to him, and he's like, no, because he is a giant egg on legs, and he can run after him. It's like, oh my gosh, that's a great, because there is no such character in Oz, but there is in Wonderland, and it's like, what a genius idea to pull this character out and put him over there. It's just
absolutely.
Yeah,
You
I love
messed
that.
with the wrong egg, buddy.
Absolutely. Getting back to what I was saying though, is it's
Yes.
back to my T-shirt, right? The thing about it is, like, I was wearing that out the other day, and I had some dude like took time out of his day to stop me and laugh at my shirt because it's funny, so I didn't mind it. Then he's like, he said, "Oh, I read real books," and I'm like, "Listen, man."
Oof, that's a.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm just kidding. And I was like, "Listen, man, I know, and it's a funny joke, yeah. But the point about comics is that comics use pictures in the same way we use language to speak. It's about communicating linguistic ideas through graphic images. So it's not just a picture book; it's doing something that picture books can't do because that's what comics can do, and it's a whole thing about linguistics, the whole thing. So and this guy was like, okay, yeah, but that's part of it. Now the thing is back, when I started reading comics, all comics had lots of words. Now, not all of them had Chris Claremont levels of lots of words, right? But all comics had lots of words. And so it was a thing where it took you the time to chew on it, to listen to those nuances of conversation, to really dig into the thing. And so you weren't flying through the book because you were digesting the book. You were taking that time in. Just like you said, Colin, I like these comics with lots of words, and I like to let them sit with me for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a book that is exactly like that, and it is, I think, the perfect platform. This kind of writing and how Bridwell did it, and even with the jokes, is the perfect complement to the Oz and the Wonderland books.
And
right?
they don't make comics like that anymore either. At least it doesn't feel like it. You kind of just, again, you zip through a comic and you just kind of wait for the next one. And I understand why they have adopted more short form comics nowadays, or at least that's what I call it, shorter storytelling, and making it so you have to buy a ton of issues because that's profitable and everything, and it just keeps you reading and whatnot. And
but it doesn't work. It doesn't. justify a $5 price tag for an issue.
No, it usually doesn't. But I understand why they do it. However, it's just I prefer it when your comics would be really nice and like there's a lot of story in them. There's a lot of pages, really wordy. Well, not too wordy, but plenty of words and whatnot. You know, just absorb it and enjoy it, and you would have a self-contained story instead of having to go back, spend like $40 to $50 a month basically just to get the whole story, even more sometimes.
Yeah,
Right.
Colin.
One of the reasons I dropped reading like Marvel and DC and stuff.
On this show, I once covered a Brave and the Bold issue, which had the Metal Men return, and each one of the Metal Men gets defeated and beaten by one of their old enemies over the course of Batman investigating the attack on one of the Metal Men. He keeps finding the other enemies, and so they bring back all the enemies of the Metal Men, and they uncover a mystery of what happened to Tin's girlfriend, and they recover it. They explain the backstory. She returns. They have a wedding, and then one of the missile men blows up and kills her, and it is 17 pages with a backup at the end of the book. Another story at the end of the book.
That's all a self-contained story.
That's how they used to do it. Yeah.
And the issue isn't even so much like we're talking about wordiness. I mean, you look at this page here, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of words to read, but they're not an oppressive amount of words. The art isn't being choked out for the sake of the
It's
word.
not a Ditko comic,
right? Well, it's not. It's even beyond that. I mean, like even a Ditko comic is often restrained compared to Bendis.
Oh, you mean like the Transformers comics for Marvel published back then? Oh.
So, even with that case, what we're looking at though is we're looking at a situation where they're using this beautiful balance, and it is about balance of using enough words to move the dialogue and enough images to move the action, right? And not so much of either that it is being oppressive either way. So we're actually making use of that marriage of form and content. That's I'm not going to sit here and say that like the Oz Wonderland War is the perfect comic, but this is the comic.
If you said that, I'd ask you if you're on some crazy pills.
No, not at all, not at all. But it's being made by people that are at the top of the game, right? Mm-hmm. That they
know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. They're telling the kind of story that they want. They are paying homage to these literary characters and the literary form that they're pulling from to tell their funny animal story. And they're doing it in a way that is giving the reader value for their time and value for their dollar. And so this comes back to one of the questions that I want to pose. And I know there isn't an answer for it, but I find it so bizarre. Like, even though it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of different reading skill to get into this comic because of the kind of characters, because of the kind of nature it is, I don't understand how this has never been collected.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I managed to get into it pretty easily without even knowing nothing about the characters.
Right. But see, that's the thing is, I like in the 80s and in the 90s, DC had these digest size volumes. This is the 3-issue Untold Legend of the Batman I bought at my my library sale like 20 years ago. Glued the cover back on myself. Anyway, this thing's great. DC had a whole series of these that they have released through the years in this little tiny format. They sold them at gas stations, they sold them at Walmarts and the checkout lanes, all this kind of stuff. They don't do this anymore. But never was this story collected into one of these. Like when Scholastic Books started getting comics in the hands of elementary school kids again, nobody at DC said, wait a second, we have the perfect property to sell to little kids at Scholastic Book Fairs and bring this book out. I cannot understand why that decision wasn't made.
DC has missed out on so many. I mean, their history is just them missing out on opportunities to properly exploit something. You know,
well, and they miss out on opportunities to do it themselves, and then they have driven out of business the people that were doing it. And I don't understand. And then instead of capitalizing on it, now that we've cleared the market, let's do this thing. No, they still aren't doing it.
Yeah. They tried to make a showcase version of the Zoo Crew, and I don't know what happened to it. It was like the same thing happened with Ambush Bug, and it's like they were like, "Oh, we should do these funny books." No, we don't want to. Well, we'll do it. Okay, and they kind of went back and forth, and then I guess they did put them out, but if you try to buy them, they're worth $70 or $90. Like you can't get them. Like they underproduced them or something. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have them, but I have the originals, so I don't care.
I believe at this point we are all familiar with the DC Comics bad at math meme.
I was not aware of that as a meme.
I don't think I have the meme, but yeah, it's
just not come without one comic.
Yeah. But you know what, Matt? I wonder if the modern readers of comic books kind of have what my niece had, where, the short attention span thing because of the way they're raised. We tried showing her Jaws. She fell asleep and she found it boring. I'm like, this is the movie that everybody got into, but it takes a while to build the intensity and drama. We look over, when that eyeball comes out of the boat and she's asleep. And we're like, what's wrong with you? And it's that whole short attention span thing that the younger kids are raised with. In the same way, I went back and read the All-Star Squadron, which is written by Roy, what's his name?
Thomas.
Roy Thomas. Yes, thank you. Who is the editor and again, the lead writer on Zoo Crew when it came out. And so, his All-Star Squadron, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm on page 9. There's so many words in every panel. He overwrites everything. But I remember enjoying them at the time. So why am I like, I'm finding this like, oh my gosh, this is too much reading. I kind of wonder if because of what do they call it? The expanded storytelling, where it's like one big balloon and, on one panel, this, the movie, what do we call it? The cinematic storytelling, the expanded storytelling, where everything's written for a trade with a story that could have been 2-3 pages or 2 or 3 issues, but it's 6 issues long. And I kind of wonder, is that why we have trouble with reading old books that have tons of balloons and tons of words? I don't know. Oh, no, I can't hear you. Uh-oh.
I muted myself because I was coughing and forgot about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I do think there's something about it that we just got out of practice with something like that, right? Where we just don't take the time because we've got reel videos and we've got YouTube shorts and all those other kind of things that are just easy to get through, and we just kind of shape ourselves that way. Our brains are muscles. I mean, they're not literally muscles, but they function in a similar way where if we get ourselves out of a particular discipline, we stop being able to participate in that. I think that's definitely part of it. The other part of it is like, so I think it's one of those things too, where when it comes to like, reading an old comic, like even reading it, like Colin was talking about, like, I can't just blitz through this. There's too much content. Well, yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
it's right. You gotta,
but that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Very good thing.
You want for some stories, you can read them, while you're waiting for the train to pick you up, right? It's just short, right? And there's some stories where you just got to take that time and invest into it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. A couple things I want to address for the chat before we call it a show is Fizz points here. Says, at one point I thought of a story where Peter Pan, Mickey Mouse, and Winnie the Pooh have a crossover. I think that sounds really fun. I think it's actually would be easy to do with a Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse too. I think you can make that pretty easy.
Peter Pan's public domain now, isn't he?
Technically, yes, yeah.
The J.M. Barrie book is anyway. Don't be using the Disney version, or you're going to get sued to heck.
Well, and here, little side note here. Until very, very recently, Disney had stopped using Peter Pan in any of their marketing materials, but were using Tinkerbell. And the reason they did that is so that they wouldn't have to share any of their money with the Great Ormond Children's Hospital, who owned the international copyright on Peter Pan. And they did not own the copyright to Tinkerbell, but they did own it to Peter and Wendy. Tinkerbell was in the public domain. So Disney Corporate was intentionally not using Peter and Wendy so they wouldn't have to give any money to an orphanage.
Yeah, good job.
Just keep consulting with Walt Disney's cryogenically frozen head about these things. He knows best.
Yeah. Anyway,
can I just tell you? I don't know if you've seen this. There's a movie called The Witches of Oz. Have any of you seen it?
no.
It has Christopher Lloyd as the Wizard of Oz.
Whoa.
Which
That already sounds good.
it sounds good. It is not good. It is not good. But here's the thing.
That's the best kind of movie.
I watched the mini-series version, which is like 190 minutes long. It's way too long. And there is a movie version that cut it down considerably. I would like to find that one and see if it's any better, because the expanded version is just too padded. It is made on the cheap for $10 million. Like they used my green screen wall. That green screen wall there, that's about what they had. They flash back to a war, and they have two ladies as fairies back to back going pew pew pew, and it's like, and then they add, we'll put the special effects on later of you shooting people who are off screen, and it's like
that just sounds like Harry Potter.
It's so this. Here's the. I have to tell. Can I have 2 minutes to
Yeah,
tell you?
absolutely, man.
Sure.
This movie is bad, but it also has one of those, like, one brilliant thing. It has one brilliant thing that is really good. And one of the guys who is the Hobbit, the Scottish guy with the Scottish Hobbit who was on Lost, is in this.
Yeah.
And,
I can't remember his name right now, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Blonde guy. He was Charlie.
Yes, and he's
Monaghan?
in this. Yes. And he's in this, and his name is Nick, and he meets Dorothy, who lives now in this time, and Dorothy has just released the Oz books now in modern times. She has an illustrator, this rather quiet guy who hangs around with her all the time, and we don't really know much about him. And she talks about how these stories came to her, and the illustrators, and of course this looks just like the Baum books. The illustrator that is with her draws like the old books, and then she ends up running into the Wicked Witch, who's trying to kill her, and she starts having flashbacks and memories of escaping Oz and getting zapped and losing her memory, just as she had fled Oz. And so we only see Christopher Lloyd for like a moment, and he's fighting a war against the Wicked Witch's forces, and he's got like dirigibles because he's a balloon guy, So
Amazing.
it's like a what do you call it? Steampunk version, like a steampunk take on Wizard of Oz. It's almost cool, except that that's like 30 seconds of the movie, and then we never see Christopher Lloyd again. And so the Wicked Witch shows up, and after a very long time, and we meet. There's like a delivery guy who shows up. He's got a patch like about this big across his chest with his name on it. I don't know why. Nobody has name tags this big. It just says Dave on it. And he comes in with this big stupid smile, hands over the first delivery of her books finally being delivered. They open it up and do a signing for everybody. And you never see him again. And I don't know why. It's the stupidest thing. But then there's another guy who is, I forget what his relation is. I think he's like the publisher or something. And the Wicked Witch shows up and stabs her illustrator through the chest and kills him. And Dorothy looks down, and straw is coming out of his belly. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, I always knew there was something weird about me. I thought I was gay." He's like, I knew I didn't really fit in here. I didn't know why. So it turns out he's the straw man in hiding. And she's like, well, "That's amazing." And then the Wicked Witch attacks, and like there's all these flying monkeys attacking people, and the publisher suddenly goes roar, and claws come out, and he's got fangs, and he starts beating one of the monkeys, and so Nick, who's been kind of like he's been courting Dorothy the whole time this whole story has been playing out. He's kind of like the two of them are kind of like falling in love, and the publisher kind of looks at her and looks at Nick and says, "You're the Tin Man." He says, "What?" He Says, "You're the Tin Man. I'm the lion. He's the Scarecrow. Your name's Nick. You're the Tin Man." He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the Tin Man." And so one of the flying monkeys attacks him, and so Dominic, runs at the guy and hits him, and the guy beats him really hard, and a truck pulls up, and the doors open, and this 8-foot tall metal robot guy steps out and is like, "What are you doing?" It was the delivery guy. The delivery guy was the Tin Man.
That sounds like how you use the public domain wrong.
It sounds like a parody version of an episode of Once Upon a Time.
It's the best. It's the best. I just told you the best part of the movie.
There's a 3-hour version of it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not going to go watch that.
I just told you the best part, unfortunately, but it's like it takes too long to get there. But just the whole, "You're the Tin Man." He's like, "Yeah, I'm the Tin Man." It's like, let's skip the whole thing where you figure out you're the Tin Man, because it took him forever to figure out he's the lion. It took this guy forever to figure out so he's like, "You're the Tin Man. Just go with it." And then he gets his ass beat, and then the actual Tin Man shows up, and it's a separate guy. I just love that. It's the best. It's in a terrible movie. Otherwise, it's a terrible way to use the Oz characters. But, so sorry. As we're talking about public domain, I was thinking about, it's like the only other reference I have for using the Oz books in a modern way. Everything that's become public domain, and it was only $10 million, but
yeah,
you can do a better job.
And going back to this story, like the Oz Wonderland War, one of the things that preserves it, from that is nothing was modernized. Everything was intrinsic to the world in which it existed, and so it works as a sequel of sorts. And I think so. You're not having to worry about adapting those concepts to a different world in which they exist. So it maintains the fairy tale, maintains the fantasy. I do want to take time to point out, though, I'm probably biased in saying that, but I don't know if you guys are aware, but my pal Nick Mueller has done his own.
I'm aware. I've read Demon Hunter
version of this with his Winnie the Pooh Winnie the Pooh Demon Hunter stories that work within his Demon Hunter mythology. But the idea that he's done is he's taken the characters and he tries to write them as faithful to the original source material in terms of their character, but then has aged up and moved characters through a timeline, and the timeline is somewhat different. So we have the origin points of these characters being consistent with their written character, and then how would these characters, from the point we leave them, have changed if their world was slightly different outside of it. And I think he's done a fairly decent job of capturing that within an action comic sort of setting. And I think that's one of the things that we get into different from looking at this property is the idea that we're still dealing with the characters, or if you're using these public domain characters, are you being honest and truthful in the way that you're using them, right? Another example of somebody I know trying this. I haven't read it. I don't know if it is. It's his price points were above what I was willing to pay and everything, which is somewhat ironic. But oh my goodness, I'm going to forget his name. He did Batman, White Knight. He did Punk Rock Jesus. Sean Gordon Murphy.
Couldn't tell you.
Sean Gordon Murphy has recently done a Zorro book, and what he's done is it's a modern era Zorro book that takes place where the old West adventures of Zorro. Thank you, Fizz. Where the old West version adventures of Zorro are the forgotten history of these modern day people, and so it reflects back to that. And I think that's an interesting kind of framework, and something that, that's in line with how Roy Thomas was using Frankenstein, using the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, using Gladiator to inform his work in Young All Stars, and to tell that. So I thought it was a really fun way of going about doing it. But the thing about it is if you're, I guess my bottom line on the whole ordeal is if you're using somebody else's characters, then I think the only right thing to do is to treat them with the same regard, whether you're telling stories on a monthly comic book, whether you're the current writer on Spider-Man, or whether you're, looking at these public domain characters. That I think you should have the same duty to the source material that you would to your own characters, to treat them with the same regard and respect, and for the love of comics, man. Don't just kill somebody because you're looking for somebody to be dead. So Grant Morrison, don't do it. Seven Soldiers suck. Okay, that's the show. And we're going to go ahead and call it there. I would like to shout out in the chat Metal, who hopefully will come back. I will be able to be back on stream shortly soon. It would, like he says, I have an almost guilty pleasure for modernized versions of Shakespeare plays where everything except the script is modern. Yeah, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. I also love that concept.
Stuff like that. It's always interesting.
The other one is Fizz asks about if DC released their animated films theatrically, would they make money? I think they might if they're able to get the market going with some of that stuff. Also, I think the theaters might be dying. So that's a whole different thing. I think there was a moment for which that they probably would have been able to get a good market going, but I'm not sure.
Sick of one, their live action remakes, and two, their modern animated movies. So,
so I'm not sure. I think there was a moment they could have done that, but I don't think that they snatched that moment correctly. And I think that's a problem. I think actually there was a real after Mask of the Phantasm. I think there was a real hunger for that kind of thing, and then they just didn't do it. And I think they probably spent their nickel. Oh, hey, Metal says they're probably back next week. Vomitorium comes back tomorrow. So there you go. That's awesome.
I was talking on mute. Mask of the Phantasm was actually intended to be on TV. It was actually a 4x3 that they at the last minute reformatted to be widescreen.
About that recently, yeah.
Yeah, I watched that. Probably watched the same video I did. That it's actually a 4x3 that's been reformatted to be. And you kind of wonder if they had made it intended for theatrical, would they have gotten a little bit of bigger budget, made it more showy, And I think if they were aiming for a theater, they might up the budget another 10 million or something, and some of these movies might really be great, like the Justice League movies, the World War II movie, the what is it called, the one where Hawkgirl betrays them, that was where Batman pilots the satellite to Earth, and Superman saves him at the last second. It's like that would be great in the theater. I still watch that one. It's like this is a good movie as a plot, as a structure, and then it builds to a crescendo. And it's great, and that would if they had thought about releasing that as a theatrical movie and bump the money up, especially with it being led into by the show, they could have possibly have done that, but they never. I don't think they've ever tried to do anything like that for theatrical. And like you say, theatrical's kind of done for.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that I think the moment to do that was 20 years ago, and DC just didn't have the stuff to make it happen. And I don't know. I've the other thing about it for me, and this is a me thing. One of the irritations that I've had, and why I've never really been able to get into the animated DC stuff, is that from the moment they stepped out of the animated thing that was doing really well for them, they were like, oh no, we want to be serious, so we're leaving this BTAS look behind, and we're not going to go with that. And then they started adapting comic book stories that were all modern and broken. Hush the Killing
Oh,
Joke.
gosh.
They're terrible.
Picked the absolute worst schlock that DC's produced. Batman versus Robin. I mean, it's just trash. And because DC doesn't respect their own history, the people they have running it don't respect what the sandbox they have. So the things that they send to Hollywood to make are also garbage. And at least that's my opinion. Other people
I know.
might like it.
I know why the problem. The problem is that it's the people who are at DC who make the money if their stuff gets adapted, and that's why Chuck Dixon's written some great stuff. It'll never be adapted because he's not at DC pushing for it to be adapted. Mm-hmm. Jeff Johns is the Batman writers are there, and they're like, hey, adapt my thing because then I get money for the Court of Owls or whatever. You know?
Well, I really enjoyed it. I recently watched the Stargirl series, the 3 seasons of that, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm not saying it all sucks because that's why stuff gets adapted. Yeah. But part of what made Stargirl really good is that they were cribbing the notes from Young Alls from Infinity Incorporated, and I'm pretty sure Roy and Dan Thomas didn't see a nickel.
Right.
And
what would make a great animated movie would be The Nail. But is anybody at DC there? Do they know about The Nail? Do they want to push The Nail? That's the problem. Is there's nobody pushing The Nail.
If we're gonna do like animated movies, one of the ones I thought was a better idea was when they were making some more of like those Adam West ones with Adam West Batman. That was more fun to me, but only because like it's Adam West Batman,
right?
So
yeah, well, and that's a whole different topic. We need.
I know. I'm just.
We need to wrap.
We'll talk about
that. Should be a show. That could be a show.
Of Batman.
Yeah, actually, that would be a fun one. So
Tips
I
on
think
Lego.
I think next week is going to be a Comics Creators Club.
Okay.
I think
I can be there.
We will find out for sure probably today or tomorrow. And so that's I think we're going to look at that. And then I'm not sure what we're doing after that for sure. We'll figure it out because we make it up as we go. We're a loose flying ship. We're a ship of fools. Anyway, till next week, get out there and read some comics and have yourselves a great night.
Oh, I will.
Oh, yeah. Also, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yep, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Bye.